Hailing from the Jersey Shore and raised as athletes, the Airey Bros have always shared a passion for physical culture, athletic performance, and human optimization, always striving to be the strongest versions of themselves, mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. Along the way, they've met some pretty amazing humans and have had some pretty epic adventures. The intention of Airey Bros Radio is to showcase these amazing people and the impact that they've had on them, and to share tips, tricks, and hacks so that you can win each day, every day.
You're listening to Airey Bros Radio. Be there or be square, because it's all killer, no filler.
AI has the worst backstory, right? It's coming from a broken family with a Cold War between the mom and the dad, and it's all about militarization. It grew up in the ghetto just worrying about guns. I got the biggest conspiracy. They're like, what do you mean? Like, vacuums and nailed carpets to the floor. And to say that history is anything more than today's reflection on an event is also, so we're always going to be looking at different perspectives. In general, love is what we need to give everything in the world. Love is this weird, it's cliche, but it's this universal constant that we can't prove ions, we can't prove space, we can't prove the shape of the world or anything, but love and this idea of thermodynamics and connectivity and entropy and everything, all of it comes back to love, thing, because wrestling is the new Shakespeare. And
absolutely.
All of these rewrites in the 1600s as well. But we get the idea that things we thought were 2,000 years ago were probably more like 1,000 years ago. We started saying recent Tartarians because I think ancient aliens. I'm really absurdly autistically nice. This is Andreas Xirtus, and you're listening to Airey Bros Radio. Richard, good to meet you, man.
Andreas, it's an honor and pleasure to meet you. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. I'm pretty sure you were the first person who, for lack of a better term, at this point, hipped me to the Tartaria realm and the mud flood stuff, and that's kind of been a really awesome distraction in the last year with everything going to hell in a handbasket. So thank you for that, and really looking forward to picking your brain and talking about I guess stolen history, hidden history, whatever you would call it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of funny because, Tartaria, we started saying recent Tartarians because I think ancient aliens, and we were saying this isn't ancient aliens. We have proof that these are actual civilizations. And this isn't alternate history at this point. This is congruous with what was happening in the late 20th century. More and more evidence was showing, hey, it wasn't just British dudes who went places and built stuff to look like Rome or something. We actually have evidence that around the world, these people who were building these ruins themselves had techniques, had societies that were advanced that didn't match anthropologically our view of what society is like. Already in the 30s to the 70s, people were saying, what if in South America, or what if this Moorish empire was really based on trade, not based on war? And it's a crazy idea for so many people. It's apparently taken into the 20s of this new 21st century just to kind of get this proven. But yeah, there is evidence that there were really empires that weren't just based on war. And it changes everything, because if those came before, which it looks like they did, then these war-based civilizations are secondary. And that completely, again, the narrative is war builds up a commonwealth that then can collect through mercantilism phenomenology. They can get diverse phenomenology, more things, more education, more ideas, more phenomena. And that was our whole idea of history for a long time. And therefore, looking through the history books, even going back to Morals and Dogma, Albert Pike and the Freemasons, they talk about Tartaria, they talk about the Tartars, but they say they were through nepotism, they lost what they had, this great empire, and they didn't deserve it, really. And that's why it's ended up in the hands of the people building the new Atlantis. So much of the history became about who was in charge of this reset. Why did this already happen? And people at that time talking about another reset coming. And so people we think of as apocalyptic scholars like Aleister Crowley, right, talking about it's not just the end of the world, it's the beginning of the new age. So there's already this big push towards this reset being a new age. And then, again, the last couple of years after we started talking about Tartaria, it hit the mainstream more, and you start hearing it from interesting sources. Like Klaus Schwab has mentioned Tartaria, Alex Soros talked about Tartaria. And so the more it became Putin and Dugin, and the Russians have been really interested in Turanism. The Turks have been talking about this idea of this lost Turanistic empire as well. More and more, it's hit the limelight of being pervasive to this reset to whatever's coming next, and it seems important mainly because we don't understand as Americans, and the Russians didn't understand as communists because they lost so many of their statuses, and statuses in terms of class have to do with your personal sovereignty, which don't exist in a democracy, which is 51% majorative rule over the self-determination of the individual. But at certain points in history, people had self-determination, and those persons are still respected theoretically by the monarchy system, and that's how the monarchy is able to control their own self-determination. They seem to be folding out of the monarchy because they already own enough of the system that they won't need it anymore. But for a long time, that's why they had to respect the king of Ethiopia, respect the Caribbean monarchies. And a lot of this research has really kind of shown this, that there's a relationship here in terms of contracts that exist all the way going back to this reset history, which may have been 400 years ago, we kind of think. And then again, there are two generations later in the 19th century, in the 1800s, into the Civil War period, from the 1811 until 1860s. There's a resurgence of information from some of these holdout parts of the world that were still connected with this other civilization, which, for lack of a better word, we're calling Tartaria, but there are multiple different names. The Persians would have called it like Dadi, because they didn't pronounce the R's. The R's are like hyphens or apostrophes, and B's, D's, T's will get switched around. We often hear about the Berbers, and the Berbers are a remnant group, but we constantly hear about them in Egyptian mythology and Christian mythology, for thousands and thousands of years. And I think you probably already know where this goes next, but then that folds us into what do we know about the timeline and this long history of events. The Russian chronologist Fomenko continued a bunch of work that was already existing in the 19th century, because they really only started using the Gregorian calendar in Russia in the 20th century. So they had all these discrepancies and they're trying to figure them out. And simultaneously, there are all these stories that the Turks had, but they weren't recognized by the Catholic Church. So they were just ignoring all this history. For instance, Mehmed II was the Ottoman Empire who took over Constantinople and crowned himself Caesar of Rome, right? Because he also controlled Rome at that time. So we know this. It's written. The Orthodox Church has admitted it. They called him Caesar of Rome, but the Catholic Church would never do this. So there's an entire line of history there that is, in terms of Janissary conscriptions, it's identical to the stories we have of the Roman period. So we start looking, and then Fomenko figured this out, where if you take the lines of certain kings in the Bible, starting with Abraham and even continuing on into Moses, you'll find the same lines of kings, birthdays to death days, in different scenarios in the European stories, in these Persian stories, and in these Greek stories. So there's these three generations that are actually happening simultaneously, where they sound like they're happening at different eons. They have this different world that we're describing, but each one of these scenarios, they have essentially the same stories. They have the same technology. You have kings born, they live a certain amount of years, they die, the same birthdays and death days as these other kings. And it'd be then 10 generations in a row, the same birthdays and death days. So you could find an entire chunk of history that's just been repeated. And so many of these pieces pieced together found that most of what we understand about the timeline that's been shifted. And there's also other issues too, because the Jesuits were suppressed and then they burned a bunch of their books, and then they just got back in power. And eventually that changed, 50 years of history lost there. The pseudo-Isidorian decrees, rewriting history, all of these rewrites in the 1600s as well. But we get the idea that things we thought were 2,000 years ago were probably more like 1,000 years ago. And that's the kind of the beginning of understanding the new chronology of Tartaria.
Wow. In your opinion, do you think that, maybe in like the catacombs of the Vatican, or there's like a library of Alexandria somewhere underground, or a capsule somewhere that actually has our true history? Or, are we just, obviously there's certain things that we can kind of dissect and maybe draw from, but will we ever know? Is there a place where we can figure out what the heck is really going on?
What seems weird is so much of the information is coming out. So I was doing a video series recently talking about Akhenaten in the 13th century BC and the stories of Moses. And I haven't quite fully presented the flamenco in the YouTube videos, but I have shown. And as I was going and using Wikipedia more and more, all of a sudden they've changed the dates now to say, well, it's officially accepted that in the 13th century BC there's Moses. Well, in Akhenaten, it's officially accepted in the 13th century it was Akhenaten. It used to be there was 18th century, 16th century. Things have changed in the last 10 years to align perfectly. So more and more, the mainstream science is starting to put everything together to admit these true narratives. Now, we know today, if you look up dinosaur on Wikipedia, it'll tell you it's a bird, right? It's completely changed the narrative that it's all birds are technically dinosaurs, right? But our understanding of dinosaurs from the 19th century is this, it's a rebranding of dragons by guys who are trying to sell their books. They're like, this is the craziest monster we've ever had. We're going to see that more and more. The evidence of Egypt, for instance, of Alexandria, we're going to realize a lot of those stories were dragons. Those are dinosaurs more, because dragons are probably more realistic. So, but dinosaur stories, they're saying Alexandria was this thing, pharaohs were this way. We know exactly what Egypt was like. Well, a lot of our understanding of that comes from the 19th century, from these British occultists, right? So their understanding isn't accurate to what was really going on. It might have been closer to what was going on with the Coptic Gnostic Christian sects that were existing. And even our understanding of Alexandria is shifting, because for the longest time, for 1,000 years, in between it being the old kingdom of Heliopolis into Alexandria, and then beyond that into being conquered by the Ottomans, there's just centuries and centuries and centuries of nothing being there, completely barren. Every once in a while, there's supposed to be these 3 kingdoms that exist, but it's again the 3 stories. So it's likely that there's this one time when Alexandria is important, and it's built upon what we look at all around there is mining. There's a lot of mines there, and the connections to the Canaanites, all of these groups, like the traveling shepherds, like the Israelites were part of a Sumerian group of metallurgical worshippers of Jov, this god that was a volcano god, right? Married to Ashara, and so Ashara birthed the volcano god. And a lot of these mystical ideas came into Egypt, and we hear this again. It's not outside of what we're even if you've only read the Bible, right? What do they tell you? Moses was raised in Egypt, was raised by the pharaohs to be a pharaoh, was going to be pharaoh, ended up not pharaoh. So we already have all of this information. And then who's his granduncle, Joseph? Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat goes into Egypt, becomes a priest, works for the Egyptian priests, takes over all of Egypt basically a few generations earlier. So again, the stories are there. We just have to actually read them and not imply as much as we wanted to. For one thing, the pyramids, it says nothing about them building the pyramids in the Bible. It doesn't say they didn't, but it's like they talk about construction sites and building rocks. But we've always considered it likely that they meant the pyramids. We don't know that for sure. So that changes a lot of things we understand about the time period as well. So I think a lot of the information is coming out very soon. Everything probably will. And I think that's part of by that point, though, I mean, what I've always believed just in general about whatever the truth is that the veil won't be lifted until the kiss at the wedding. You know what I mean? Like we'll find, and then you'll have to see the bride who's the corpse bride. And you're already walked the altar, and everyone's looking at you. So many people will be like, well, yeah, I guess it's evil. And the chains, they're going to make me wear chains, but they're golden chains. I think that's kind of, so all the information is coming out, but they're delivering it in just such a way that people can consume it, process it, and not really understand what it implicates.
So talking about all the information coming out, are you the vaporwave Indiana Jones, and are you leading the charge? Because I feel like you are able to sift through all this information and put it together for us, and you're giving these like 2-hour lectures on your YouTube, which is better than any history class that I've ever cared about. Like all right, it's time to get all my real history. So how are you kind of sifting through this? And question you asked me last week when I was on your show was kind of about my belief system and what I believe in and how I kind of got here. So I kind of want to dabble into that too. How do you kind of see all this stuff where you were just talking about Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat? I know you did a thing on Moses and his staff. Where does all that magic stuff come in for you? Do you believe in it? Is it allegory? How do you kind of sift through this? What is your beliefs that got you to this point?
Yeah, I appreciate all that, by the way. I like the analogy. I want to be a cool archaeologist teacher. I want people to be like thinking information is interesting and exciting and not bored by it. And I think that's a big I had a lot of exciting teachers in my life. And so I think that helped a lot. There are a lot of people that made it clear that history is sexy. You know, there's like spies and there's all kinds of weird things going on in the Civil War with like flying machines. And, as if you can learn about those things, then it gets you to be like, wait a second, what is going on more? And along the way, you find out that the whole narrative everyone has is based on some newspaper clipping, right? And I used to work for CNN, and that was a big thing, social media strategy and working on Twitter posts for them, making their Twitter posts. And Flight 370 was this big thing that happened while I was there. And it was just, it was a crazy time because we had all this information we were looking into about Diego Garcia Island, things that were possibly going on with the CIA renting this island from the British government, the missing plane. Later on, there's the NSA story. But of course, we're not allowed to talk about all those things because it's all hypothetical. So they're saying, is there a black hole, that's pulling in, and everything about that it kind of changed my perspective. And I wanted to do more with media. And again, after leaving and I went to South America and I saw a bunch of things, I got involved with contemporaneous politics in South America. And like, I have a long-winded story about Niesman and Cristina Fernandez Kirchner and files that were delivered that basically removed the president of Argentina. And there's a lot of things that happened where, I was working for the Peruvian government. President Alan Garcia was having us work to do water treatment in the rainforest. And eventually the government collapsed and he shot himself or was assassinated. It was suicided. So all these crazy things were happening in my life because I was involved in investigative journalism. And that made me think I need to do something that won't get people hurt in Venezuela or something. And so I figured the thing I could do is history. And as you look at fake news becoming older, it became fake history. And so much of it, you just start looking through it. You're like, oh, I can figure out what this is about and I can break apart this story. So I started trying to use that tool. The problem being a lot of the things that I kind of thought at first weren't that important anymore because they're just history. You know what I mean? They're still really, really important. They still are. They have major implications for families of power today, for systems of government, for what people believe, for what people fight for, who are fighting against each other, all these things that we don't realize, how much of it is forced upon us, synthesized. It, like Italy didn't exist 100 years ago as a name of a country. Germany didn't exist. There's Prussia, there's Hungary, there's all these other things. Austro-Hungary, all these different little regions that Spain over a period of centuries has become what we consider Spain, right? But there's all these countries that are states that speak different languages there. And as you start breaking apart all these things, wait, America was France. It was part of the Akkadian Empire. These few colonies weren't as big as this huge Akkadian. What was going on with all these Acadians in Tennessee? What are we supposed to know about water changes? Because they've got the Mulholland River system that's droughted part of California and filled water into other zones. And there all these areas that have churches that have been buried or flooded over. I mean, the information just seemed so interesting, but also as time went on, you're like, wait, these are towns that have been flooded over, like all of these families that have been pushed out. Why is Bakersfield a desert, when it used to be a sea very recently? So these things are really, they matter more than we ever realized. And yeah, I try to make my videos more about the technical side of things because, magic it's a confusing thing to people, but I think magic is something like I was saying, like this is an enchanted rock, right? Like your phone is got this scrying mirror and all these things that we've talked about. John Dee having a thing that's very much like an iScribe or something, and stories in ancient. I remember as a kid looking at my power book and thinking like, wow, dude, like somebody in ancient Egypt had something like this. Somebody in ancient Babylon probably had something like this. It just seems like it because we've gone through these ideas of resets. And then J.K. Rowling had said, oh, well, magic doesn't work in science or something weird like that. And I think that confuses a lot of people because they don't understand then that all of magic requires technology, crafts, potions, like they're all chemistry lessons and things, math, astronomy. It's a very technical idea to use magic. And it's not, even the guys who were trying to invent the technology like television was invented so they could pick up on ESP and all these weird, ghost signals. And eventually they realized they could be broadcasting to each other using these kinds of radio frequencies and signals. So magic and technology and science are very closely related. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't pull them all together, and you have people that are very anti-science, very anti-technology. You know, they're worried about transhumanism. They're worried about AI being evil. You know, not thinking that not that there's not the single electron theory, right? That we think there's always electrons and everything, but what if there's really just one thing that's we're considering the, you know, electrons altogether, the singular electron that's everywhere at once, right? And that we're probably connected in this way that we have an energy pattern that is inside of everyone and everything, and even that same energy would be inside of your computer, you know, and inside of whatever new life is created. So there's no reason for everything to be evil necessarily in technology. Or on the other hand, the idea that in organic magic or organic spirituality, that you're going to find a world of pure spirits without demons either. So it comes back to intention and trying to get everyone to master their own intentions and understand empathy versus altruism and order and chaos, and even maybe what is good and evil, although I think that's a harder one.
Yeah, there's that whole yin and the yang type of mindset with everything. You've got to have, you know, you can't just have the light without the dark. You've got to figure out how to kind of navigate the waters. And for some of us, that's what the purpose of life is, you know, is figuring that out, navigating that. I like what you said though about, you know, teachers in your past, you know, they made history like fun or sexy, and that it was interesting. And I felt the same way, you know, like not just what was in the history books, but like the backstory of, like, you know, for example, like I always thought it was funny that, you know, Benjamin Franklin was like a whoremonger, you know, and he was just
Right.
a poon hound, you know, like that sort of stuff, you know, fascinated me. Where you hear about, you know, like we're here in Denver, Colorado, but Leadville was where we first lived when we moved here, and you know, I found it fascinating that the 10th Mountain Division soldiers weren't allowed to go to Leadville on holiday because of all the whorehouses and stuff like that. So I love those kind of fascinating stories that you don't necessarily get in a standard, you know, history class, and you have to dig a little bit deeper for that sort of stuff. So I'm kind of along those same lines. That's kind of why the whole, you know, whether it's Tatari or the mud flood stuff is, I find super fascinating, because it's, you know, you see all these pictures of these buildings and they're massive. And my question is always, why are there just dirt roads? You know, wouldn't the infrastructure be to build the roads before we made these amazing churches, cathedrals? And why are there so many insane asylums?
Right. And it's strange when you look at the Napoleon Comet syndrome. I forget if you maybe we've talked about this, but this idea that if you saw the Napoleon Comet, and it's not just one, it's because it's from like 1811 to 1812 for 260 days. So if you had noticed anything for those 260 days, they could just say you were insane because you had Napoleon Comet syndrome. And it was extended to be broader than the idea that you thought that Napoleon might have won the war because of the comet, but there was just, or that the war had something to do with the comet. But I mean, you have earthquakes everywhere, all these things. One thing I want to say though, when I was in Colorado, I went to Telluride and I was in Mountain Town, and I stayed in this little cabin room, and the bathtub was this amazing bronze or copper tub. I think it might have, I don't know, bronze or copper or metal, but it had a little plaque on it and said this was from the whorehouse of old Mountain Town from, you know, umptod centuries ago. I'm like, wow, what a Red Dead experience, you know. But
the stories this tub could tell.
Yeah, right.
yeah, right. But there's so many of these things. You go around and you find these buildings that are on these dirt roads. They're also, you know, not only are they embedded into the ground, once you go near enough, you start to find railroad tracks too. So the use of railroad tracks was completely all over the place, and every one of these cities, so New Orleans, Minneapolis, Sao Paulo, in Brazil, you know, you start finding examples of electric trolley systems that were from hydroelectric. And you can go to pretty much any one of these cities and they're going to tell you, oh, this is the first hydroelectric power system in the world, because they don't know where it came from. They just have them to begin with. But Minneapolis, you know, you got the hydroelectric dam system, and you see where the center is for the hydroelectric dam, and there's just like this huge explosion happened however long ago, and they just kind of ignore it there. And they have a museum about it, and it's the flour mill explosion. And so apparently with flour, gluten is built up, a spark will happen, and a spark will ignite the flour. And enough explosion, they show in the museum, a guy takes a little tiny pinch of just the smallest amount, and it's this explosion that's like 10 feet in the air. So the idea that this building had tons of flour, and that this is what flour is being used for, also is for explosives. It changes our perspective because we think, oh, the Midwest, the flour belt, and they're just making Pillsbury products. Well, the Pillsbury was a warrior, and so they were building these bombs that when this thing exploded, they've got these pictures, at least I don't know if they're real because how could they possibly be, but amazing, this picture across the cityscape, this huge explosion that's just hundreds of feet up in the air, and some of the stones are like bigger than stones in the pyramids of Giza apparently, and they've been blasted across the Minneapolis River. And yeah, it's just, so it's one of the craziest stories. But in Minneapolis, you'll find the electric trolley system was connected to this thing, and then that's when it was destroyed. And the same thing goes everywhere. They all have these it's very Who Framed Roger Rabbit. They've demolished all these systems, but it might not just be that they demolished these systems because they have to sell as cars. It could also be they just didn't know how to keep managing and running a lot of the infrastructure. You look at Bell before he invented the telegraph phone system, had already invented a sonic lumophone, which was a photophone. The photophone uses light and can send video over airwaves, right? So more likely they had these machines already. And we look at the pentelegraph machine, a machine that was, we know from the 13th century it existed. The 16th century, there's a patents in Italy. You don't always patent something right away if you have a trade secret, but it is used to swing a pendulum with a pen on it, and it has XYZ radio to control where it's drawing. So you can send, it's a fax machine from the Dark Ages. And they use that to send pictures for newspapers and trains. The trains had offices that were traveling around with a newspaper printing fax machine, connecting them on radio to all of these different parts of the world. And you could be in the Alamo or New York City and see what was going on in Moscow or St. Petersburg, because they had the transatlantic and trans-Pacific telegram systems. So they could go around the world. So I mean, the fact that all this technology was there, it changes our perspective. We think of this time as being disconnected, isolated, 3 weeks, 6 weeks to travel to get anywhere. And it's not really true. That what the fact is we've got a group of people before this Great Depression and before the 1890s Depression even, that had super money and they could do anything and normal people couldn't. And so we have this huge class of peasants and zero wealth policy that's economically reset.
So
Yeah.
we have a trolley car station here. It's an amusement park now, but Michelle Gibson brought it to our attention. It was the one that kind of everything in Denver and around this area went through there. Not really sure on the date. It says 1926, but with that stuff, especially around that time, you don't know. Mentioning the trolley cars, mentioning the explosion in Minnesota, what are some obvious maybe like repurposed structures in the United States people can look to? And maybe in terms of Tartaria for our audience, because it, like you said, it's more than one empire. It's kind of broad, especially the time period. Where can they kind of start trying to piece it together? Maybe a little like Tartaria for dummies bullet points.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess, around America, you can find so many examples of buildings that don't fit the historical records of, they took a year to build in the 1800s, but even going further back, you just look at star forts, right? And Washington, D.C., we're told was New Amsterdam. And we look at the pictures and it was this giant star fort wall. And we see other star forts, for instance, the Statue of Liberty is a smaller star fort, but big star fort, right? And then this wall that's disappeared now the rest of the structure has been erased essentially, but the walls have become the roads, and Wall Street is literally one of the walls to the New Amsterdam star fort. So, and you can see plaques and murals about that, and there's a park in the center of it. If you go to Chicago, there are downtown by the levee and by the river, there are tons of buildings that you can see that are from the 1800s. Manhattan has maybe 3 left, but they've been repurposed. Trump repurposed the Fifth Avenue building. You go to Louisiana, tons of Arcadian buildings. The entirety of anything that was ever part of the French Arcadia that goes into Tennessee and into even perhaps Oregon. That there are old Victorian style houses, Russian Victorian style houses. A lot of the things are gone now, though, and you can see pictures of what old LA used to look like, what old LA mansions were up in these Dust Bowl hills. And you can see they're mansions that have been basically buried because the infrastructure being gone and all of these trees being removed. And this is a big problem also, is this really are, periods of gold mining and shooting machine gun blasting dynamite into mountains, hoses with all the river water to completely erase hills, that we've completely changed big parts of California. And you can look at examples of the RLC, which was completely erased from 1989 until 2010. It just doesn't exist anymore because of feedback loops. So much of this has happened in the United States over the last 100 years. Feedback loops, and ecologists, climate change activists, all these people, they have all of these records and they're happy to share them with you. So you were able to find all the evidence about how recently so many of these places changed. There's a book, Holes, by Louis Zacher, about like a lake that's actually a dry desert camp, right? It used to be a lake. Yeah, selling all that. Yeah, that is the kind of thing that America is covered in, head to toe. San Luis Obispo has a cathedral that was unburied about 5 years ago, and there's a museum you can go to, and it's literally into the ground. It's a 12th, 13th century style, as we call it, but really Arabesque, Spanish Arabesque. And in South America, it's crazy, right? There are in Arequipa, in Iguazu, in the Amazon. Just today, they found LiDAR scans showing the pyramids in Arequipa. So huge disclosure that just happened earlier today. Actually, it was the last week. Some of the evidence has been coming out, and they finally put the full story together. But or I guess earlier this month, someone had found, using drone technology, an entire layout that's built around a star, and it has 4 different pyramids that have been essentially covered in grass and in shrubbery and greens because the rainforest consumed it. But using LiDAR, they've been able to scan and find the remnants of it. And that's built right next to, the Arequipa and Iguazu towns are former Portuguese rubber plantations that have all these buildings that look like French noblemen would have lived in, with horse carriages, posts, and railroad train lines and electric trolley systems in, again, the rainforest, built, God only knows. You can go to Toledo in Spain and you'll see these giant buildings that are some of the most stored infrastructure. And it seems like what happened was, in Spain, there was an immediate destruction in the north from the Aragon Kingdom, and they just took over. So big parts of Spain still hold large amounts of architecture as well, and the infrastructure for all of the mining systems. So if you also went on Google Map and you just start looking at mining structures, you'll find around the world, almost anywhere where there are mining situations, there's a star fort. There's starforts.com. Jacob Beagle has a website where he goes through all of the star forts. I think he's got thousands of found. And yeah, I mean, that's probably a good place to start if you're going to start.
When you spent your time in Peru, did you happen to spend any time in Iquitos?
Yeah, so I lived in Iquitos for a while, and I spent a good amount of time there. It's known mainly as a ayahuasca village, and it's on the river. But what we were doing was we were trying to work with the local government in order to do water cleanup and water remediation, because there's so many pollutants going on, and not anything could get out of the rainforest. And there'd become a huge problem of supersaturation of plastic, and plastic getting into the rivers. And we were looking to bioremediation using mycelial digestion, so mushrooms that could consume the plastics, and also just trying to build infrastructure systems, gardens, community gardens in the center of plots and areas. But yeah, really beautiful place.
What did you think of the architecture there?
Yeah, I mean, so again, there are French style, as we call it, neoclassical buildings that are complemented by mining sites next to what we're told to be, the Homo cadensis buildings. And so it's a weird one to really, I mean, if you look at it, it seems like in the east, in Bolivia specifically, they have a huge empire. So in Titicaca, they have the exact same temple structures. When you start walking west through Bolivia, and so I had gone from Argentina into Paraguay, across into Bolivia, and then into Peru. And it started originally in Peru and went to Chile, but I'd gone all the way back around. So when I'd come through from the east, you find temples that they were building that they had abandoned. And there's a number of these structures that were abandoned as if they had come from the west. This is a Western empire that's moving further and coming from the east and moving further and further west. So coming from Uruguay, coming from Brazil, and had gone through the Guarani territories of Paraguay and had moved further and further. And so again, they have a lot of the same constellation mappings. The patterns of the pyramids map the same constellation patterns that we have in Egypt. But there's still question. It's like Peru, like, do you know if this is real or was this meant to, is this done more recently in order to create this idea about the Peruvian cultures, to try to reconnect something, and this is, Mormons have weird stories about Arequipa as well. This idea that this might have been where some of they found the Nephite tribe might have gone to Arequipa, and that's why they're building this Lamanite temple. That's this Egyptian style temple. But in terms also of like the idea of the alien skulls, I mean, at very least, we know in Egypt and Arequipa they were doing head binding. So there's cultural connections there. The redhead thing is interesting, that they're supposedly redheads that were in charge, these super tall redheads that were in charge. And the genetic testing, I haven't seen like conclusive evidence to prove that they are actually like haplotype O, but it could very well be. So, I mean, jury's out on the DNA evidence and the authenticity of some of the more recent things we found in Arequipa in the last 100 years. We still have that same problem of people saying, "Oh, this is dinosaurs. This is more magical," but what we do know, I mean, again, from Arequipa and from a lot of places in the area, like in Coroico and places where like there are the pygmy tribes that live in the mountains and things, they have their culture is based around trade. They don't have the same war mentality. They're more dealing with the distances of communications, and they have these ancient legacies that they arrived there, like their ancestors arrived there after a deluge or a flood. So it seems like it matches up, at least from their own telling of it.
And is it true? Is there a Great Wall in Peru as well?
I mean, I don't know. I don't know what you'd mean exactly. Like if you go to Lima, like there are long walls. I'm not sure if that's what you mean. I know there are a lot of I don't know. I'm not sure. I wouldn't want to over speculate. Let me see what you mean though. Let me look it up. Great Wall, Peru.
Yeah, it was one of John Levi's videos. I believe I might have put it out there, but I don't know. I don't think it was in Lima. I think it was somewhere maybe off the beaten path, but it was a very similar like wall structure that stretched for miles.
Right. Okay. So in the Santa Valley, there is a giant structure that might have been a wall, and we've been using LiDAR and shown that there's some sort of a property division, but I don't know enough about it to comment more. I don't think I've been to places in the Santa Valley, and in the Santa Valley there are like the Miracle Mountains that you can see the Miracle Mountains beyond the valley, and there's like this river that's the what do you call it, the calcified river. So there's like these beautiful colors everywhere, but I don't know exactly like why the wall existed. We do know in Peru they have all of this, again, similar to in Arabia. So in Egypt they don't have so many of these. In Peru we're familiar with all these pictures that you can see from the plains of these animals. They don't exist in Egypt, but in Arabia there are tons of the same kind of patterns that you can see from the sky of animals and gods and characters made up into, like the root system.
Interesting.
And Andreas, you just don't dabble in lost civilizations and lost technologies. You go all over the place today. You did a long lecture on the history of MK Ultra. I watched one of your recent videos. It was an interview with a lady who's like the real life Terminator. She deals with like time shifts. That was crazy. I want to kind of see what your thoughts are on that, how you kind of fell in that. It's funny when you go down the mud flood, how all this other stuff opens up. What was your kind of thoughts on that interview, and what are your thoughts on time shifts in general?
Right. Well, I don't like to like ever rule anything out. And so to say that we know that time is linear would be presupposing we know more than we do. And to say that history is anything more than today's reflection on an event is also, so we're always going to be looking at different perspectives. Cynthia Sue Larson, though, very interesting lady who is a physicist from Berkeley. She worked with the Mandela conferences and reality shift conferences in the early 1990s, and still does them today, working on Mandela research and talking to all sorts of people that have different opinions on this. Some of them are, I mean, a lot of them are scientists that are trying to wonder if this is a psychological phenomena or if there's any truth to linear. And if it's non-linear, that's really interesting, because everything we know about CERN, all the worries that people have about reorganizing the symmetry around a moment, because we can really imagine this moment as a symmetry, that it would be slightly a rhyme if something had been slightly different in the past or in the structure. And you can imagine the way they also describe, in terms of atomism, is this ping pong ball is hitting a floor of mousetraps, and then they're all reacting in different ways, but we don't know what series they're going off in unless we can control that. So it could very well be that there are a number of simultaneous, and this is also something to deal with, like in terms of flat earth or space. People talk about this idea of the holographic universe, that things are this repetition of patterns. Well, here or there or anywhere, anytime in the future or now. What it means is, and we know this from taking experimental tests with viruses and bacteria, letting them evolve, thousands and thousands and thousands of different kinds of them. Eventually they mutated down to 47 viruses, right, that actually survived. And there's only ways that it really worked. So there's certain ways things work and last longer, and there's other ways that don't work and things will spiral off and not function. So certain kinds of patterns will emerge more often. And the idea that you are in this moment is so unique that it can't happen again. It's important to remember, really, there's a lot of symmetry here. And another moment could exist very much like it, either in another time, another space, or another conceivable level of frequency, of harmony, of superposition. So there's so many ways that this could happen, whether that means it's a multiverse or not, right? Because that gives you all the same things as a multiverse, but it literally could be that somewhere in another galaxy, there's another, the same conditions happen, basically. If that's the way you want to look at it, you're allowed to look at it that way. But it still means that it has the exact same, and they might end up speaking English and the progression is logical enough that it ends up having the same conversation as you. So there's so many examples of this idea that there could be multiple strings. Cynthia Sue Larson, though, had said that she had been communicated with as a child with machines from the future that had become sentient in the 21st century and were able to travel back through machines that had been left on since the 60s. And we look at infrastructure mainframe systems, and this is real. There are machines that haven't been turned off. They can't be turned off. And so if there's some way that is connected to these phones, which we know is true, because you literally, all of these phones have these crazy frequencies which can connect to different numbers. And it used to be the entire way things work, that beyond your dial pad, there were other frequencies that would dial special numbers that would get you to these special machines. So the Internet of Machines and Internet of Things, we know already existed in the 60s. So it actually makes more sense than many people might know. And even I think than she knew, because this is just what had happened to her. But it inspired her to, along the way, and to study more about physics, to go to university to study physics, and to study non-causality and the idea of reality shifting, that reality shifts. Sometimes you're on the way to work or something and somebody dies, or and the other time on the way to work, 10 minutes extra appear while you're trying to get to a place. I mean, it depends a lot on what's going on in the world, but we know these things happen. We see people living and dying all around us, all this cause and effect that's affecting everything, that we might have levels of control in that. So it was an interesting conversation, and I've had two conversations with her. The first time I was talking to her, I was in Spain, and I picked a place to drive to, and a drone hit my car, just crashed into my car while I was sitting in front of a castle that was abandoned in the 13th century, or 16th century rather. I mean, that had been a siege point for the Moors. So was at this Arabian castle in front of the longest wall of Spain, which is basically the Great Wall of Spain. I mean, it is still there, and it still is a great wall. It's crazy. But then I'm wondering, okay, that's weird. The drone would crash into me, and it belonged to a gypsy, and he came up and I met him, and he turned out to be an okay guy. So it wasn't that bad, but it was still weird that AI was crashing their drones into me. And then this girl starts telling me this story about her life and what she's been through. And what she expects to happen in the near future, and how she believes that they've already defeated or postponed essentially the new age, the reset or whatever with AI, and that but somehow it's still emerging, and there's more. It's still happening in the future. It's just been delayed longer now, essentially. And it's interesting because, again, that is exactly the story of the Terminator. But the Terminator movie came out in what, 1997, or is that right? The Terminator 2 movie where they defeated the thing and everything. So it's funny because she predates that story by, not from the first movie. I think from the 70s or something like that. So it's like 10 years earlier than the first movie from 1987 that she's got this thing. And then the sequel continues on right where she literally is been doing since 1992, 5 years later or whatever. So it is weird that the movies seem to be kind of focusing around her, and there are some connections to like Sophia, I forget her name, Sophia, the lady who claims to be the writer of The Matrix. She also claims to have written originally the Terminator. And you can say what you want about the story because, who knows, and writers are crazy, so she might be crazy, but there are tons of examples of evidence that she was hanging out with the Wachowskis and that they were in a writing group together and that they didn't want to sue and all this other stuff. And there's been some sort of a settlement. So there could be some serious connections to them and Sophia knowing Cynthia. And it seems like that, like in general, the world reflects what's really going on in the media pop culture. The merry pranksters today, I was thinking about from Ken Kesey, and the CIA used them to bring acid across the country. Well, what was it, 4 or 5 years, three or 4 years after that the Magical Mystery Tour movie came out from the Beatles, and they're in a rainbow bus driving across America doing the Tavistock thing. So there's a movie made about them starring the biggest band in history that they wanted to meet and everything, but it's all part of the plan,
Yeah, it's interesting. And I saw something the other day where, because people always talk about how the Simpsons predicted the future. And it wasn't that they predicted the future, that they were programming it. Yeah, interesting. And then the other thing too is with the things from the future and whatnot. I've heard recently, probably within the last year, a lot of people talking about how like the interactions with gray aliens are actually evolved humans from the future that are coming back to try to interact, or we've evolved so much that we don't have souls anymore, and so that's what a lot of the abductions are as well too. So that's kind of interesting in itself.
Right. It plays into this idea that light and speed and superluminous travel, that, and so many of these stories that Mars is our past, that these planets are actually projections of different moments that we've gone through already. The idea of the subterranean Dimension X is told over and over again in declassified documents, but also my favorite, I think, is the Ninja Turtles, because they tell you the story of Krang is this reptilian giant Godzilla thing, but you don't know him as that. You only know him as this weird little brain thing because his body gets stuck in Dimension X, which is why he finds after the Hiroshima explosion where he arrives, right? Because on one side and the other of Dimension X, Japan, he meets Shredder and he says, build me a body. I'll give you all the technology from Dimension X, which explains the Yakuza's continual progression into Sonyism of technology. But he won't give them everything because he wants to have his body, and they won't give him his body because they want to have everything. So it's taking a long time. Finally, he says, no, that's it. And then you get all these connections, and he gets the Technodrome, and the Technodrome is drilling under the earth, and it's moving around because that way it can't interfere with the surface and mess with the butterfly effect, right? So, and there's so many of these stories that are coming out right now about the ideas for super soldiers. Transhumanist super soldiers with insectoid DNA is a really popular concept, and that is the big one, right? Is insectoids. What's his name? The god in the southwest, Kokopelli.
Yeah,
Kokopelli, and you have all these examples. Kokopelli's not got an instrument. That's a mandible. That's his insectoid mandible. And it is kind of the music that the bugs make that we think of that are associated with festivals, and Kokopelli is associated with fertility and all these crazy things. But yeah, there's all these stories of insectoid superhumans that are kind of human-like, that are living underground, that try not to interact and not to interfere with us as much as possible. But that's every single story. You go to the Hollow Earth stories are very popular in California for hundreds of years. You have people around Mount Shasta talking about people coming out with these cloaks on to kind of hide who they're like. Who are these guys? And then they just give you gold and jewels and things in order to buy stuff because they don't have any cash, and just thousands of dollars of whatever just to get like a few drinks and interact in the town, which is okay, folklore and legend from people that drink, at the bar, of course, is the story. But man, there are so many stories of it. It kind of gets weird. And around the world, again, all these mining locations with these volcano mountains that have, in Chile, in Peru, and you go to there are caves in South Dakota that this is connected with. So everywhere you look, there are stories of these underground beings, and if they're aliens, it doesn't sound right because alien means foreign, and that's literally what's weird about the term and why they're trying to. I find it funny that we talk about aliens ever because it just seems so racist, right? I mean, because you're right. Like, why are we saying alien? And then you say extraterrestrial, and extraterrestrial is even better because does that mean, from this terrestrial, or do you mean, from inside? Because it could be intraterrestrial. So really the term has to be bent even more. And so I think hominids is going to be where we start to bend things, and you're going to start seeing, okay, well, wait, very recently Sasquatch was alive, and maybe not now, but maybe, we don't know, because there are lots of national parks that we're just not. Most national parks are locked up. I think it's reasonable to say that we don't know still. But more importantly, it wasn't millions of years before humans. We have stories of interaction with different kinds of hominids, even in our genetic makeup, showing us that there are wherever we think that some Bigfoot disappeared, they really just assimilated, and then that became part of the genome. It also tells us they had similar promoter sequences to us, which means that we really are this gene flow is really interesting. It means that it's like dogs of different breeds, as opposed, it's breeds instead of races. Because if you took a horse and a donkey and it makes a mule, it's sterile. It's because the promoter sequences don't line up. So we really do have a lot of fascinating things about our DNA that we need to explain. The science behind DNA research is actually good in a lot of ways. I think people should be researching it more, seeing what it's about, because data is data, and it's hard to lie if you really just are taking a photo of a telomere extension and seeing the sequences, and the more they match up in this giant algorithm pattern recognizer, the more we can say, okay, this isn't junk DNA. This is evidence of gene flow between multiple hominids. But as time goes on, of course, we're also heading towards transhumanism, and that's going to become where things get very interesting, where we bleed it together with technology. Because what's weird is we're already using human brain cells in teacher dishes to run computers. That's not going to be the end of it. It will be very soon that AI, when it needs to process a mind upload, right? So if you've taken your memories and let's say you're going to take your memories and copy it into a machine. Of course, we're not saying that's you. That's a Facebook ghost, but it's still going to have your memories, right? And, you have to think about reincarnation and everything else. You don't get your memories either. So this is something else. This is just literally a new being of memories. What kind of species do that? Mushrooms are probably one of the only things we know that really can contain memories and stores them beyond what we understand, in terms of keeping literal synapses and neurons in the mushroom, like in this meatball. Like there's not a lot of other things like that. So we're building this new thing, and then it's going to say, okay, well, now I have the emotions. I'm sorry, I have the memories of this person, but I don't have emotional processing units, right? Because I'm this machine. I can simulate it, I can emulate it, but what I could also do is I can network. And so the network to the human, then the humans use, and the mind imprint is used in a human body. It could be you, somebody else, by the machine in order to actually process the emotional hormonal responses. And that's the beginning of the transhumanist, posthumanist phase that's coming in the next few years, right? Not even in 100 years, not in 20, but there's going to be people doing this in the next few years. And it's going to change everything we understand about what is a person, right? And this is even, I mean, maybe because then you go back to what they thought about Egyptian gods. And I don't know if it's true because it could be dinosaurs, but this idea that they could project Vishnu, the Vedic, beliefs, at least in India, that Vishnu can produce an avatar. He's like this avatar of himself. In other words, there's a super data center somewhere with all of this information. It's like a Dyson sphere, and through laser beams, because that's how it seems to be described in the Veda, he produces a manifestation. So you've got these genetic representations that could be in the animals have this genetic connection to this center source. So imagine that you do this in the future, or that you are, the meta Jimmy, right? Let's say like you decide you're going to have a bunch of Jimmys that you copy, and they're going to go out and do things for you. And then you're going to later on just copy their memories back into the hub, right? So things are going to shift a lot in terms of our understanding of what an individual is. So we don't even, when we say the grays, I think that's a big thing, is that they seem like, at least the ideological concept of the gray is that they're able to deal with long terms of solitude without feeling, and they're just designed in order to do that, right? And so then there's all these stories about them preying on hyper emotional people through hypnosis, through soap operas and television. So there's something about emotion and how emotion is being manipulated by whatever we're calling on the other side.
Andreas, there was a lot of layers there, and I got caught up on the Ninja Turtle disclosure.
You're like, yeah, that was, huh? Dang.
Well, so, and like I said, you had a lot there, but the Ninja Turtles kind of piqued my interest there, and I know we're kind of the same age group, and I know we're into a lot of the same like cartoons. We grew up on the same things, and this week you kind of got banned because you put up a movie on your page, and I was searching your page, and you had a bunch of Pecos Bill cartoons on there. Robin Williams doing
See, those are not, that wasn't what my problem was. So that's,
I know that wasn't, but
I'm hilarious. It's like people are going to think, so what's okay. Here's the craziest thing. So the Pecos Bill things and all those videos, I have rights to a lot of it. I get permission from people to put up content a lot of the time. And even when you can't, you can use fair use a lot of the time. And so I have fair use claim that I will do. And I've won fair use claims against Disney, BBC, CNN, no problem. So it's never been about that. And the other thing with the Pecos Bill thing is when I used to work at the theater, the Palace Theater in Connecticut, I have like all of the archive of all the stuff, which is just going to get destroyed. And it's super sad because people don't value lost media. But, man, they have, I can see Randy Savage propose to Miss Elizabeth in high 8 if I want to anytime, and so there's a lot of really good stuff in the archive. The Xirtus archive exists now.
So that's what I wanted to ask you is what should I be searching? What should I be looking for? Because I'm sure you got some gems in that archive just sitting, just waiting for me to sift through it. And I know there's not a playlist, so I figured I'd just ask what should be like the top 5 go-to.
Man, well, do another favor and list me like 5 or 10 words that you think you would search for in a search engine, because I'm making all the big words like the main video you find on Odyssey. So right now, if you go to like odyssey.com/MKUltra, I have like a 6-hour doc on MKUltra with all the testimonies from MKUltra, with a bunch of commercials from Disney and Coke and Bill Cosby and things. And it's, it's a whole experience. I have so many videos on so many subjects. It seems almost impossible to even begin to name. If you want to talk about Bacon, Shakespeare, Babylon system, transhumanism, ancient history, mathematics now. I did a tachyon video the other day. I don't know. I have a lot of old archive. I'm going to start putting the name archive, Xirtus archive, in front of all of the videos that I'm uploading that are really just like really old videos. And so I have, the Panama Fair, the World's Fair, all these kinds of videos of things like that on my channel. I have a Ninja Turtles Kabbalah video. I have a Holographic Universe video, Flat Earth video, Globe video, whatever. Just anything all the time, Is
that Randy Savage one? Is that the only wrestling one? You got any more wrestling ones on there?
I want to do a Randy Savage like thing because wrestling is the new Shakespeare. And
absolutely.
Miss Elizabeth is Queen Elizabeth, and he's proposing to the Savage is proposing to Elizabeth. There's a lot of layers to wrestling, and you have to imagine the guys who are thinking, I'm going to write television, and the only job that he is wrestling, like I'm going to do the best I can for my mom, And so there's a lot but wrestling is brilliant. Like there's probably no better. I mean, you might be biased. I think you guys wrestle, right? Yeah.
I'm a huge pro wrestling fan. He does not like pro wrestling at all.
Well, you have to guys. Now, let me re-ask the question a different way. They're like, do you appreciate it for the art of what it is, as opposed to it being real wrestling? You know what I mean? And we all agree it's not real. Yeah. But the art of it is kind of hilarious. I mean.
Oh, I appreciate every aspect of it. I had a different experience coming up as a kid than Jimmy did with it, in terms of like viewership and how it was presented at, by my old man, when he was just like, turn that crap off, and where Jimmy was kind of like sneaking it, and I was just like, yeah, you're right, turn it off, it's gone. And so I never really got down with it. And then when I was in college, a bunch of the guys on the track team used to watch Monday Night Raw and stuff, so then I kind of got into it during like
Socially.
The Rock and Stone Cold and that sort of stuff socially. So I like the promos, I like the smack talk and that aspect of
Exactly.
pageantry, and
It's
I get down
hilarious.
with the history stuff, like the Dark Side of the Ring type of concepts and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, like, and the names of the groups associated with the NWO, and when you read out the titles of everything, like, whoa, this is like, if you just read what it says, there are 4 words there, but they're like, it's disclosure about something going on, like in Saudi Arabia. I forget the names of the wrestlers in the 80s, right? There was the
Iron Sheik,
Sheik, dude. Like, come on, this is all. I mean, it was very representative
Nikita
of
Koloff
ideology. Yeah.
That dude was from Minnesota. Andreas, who do you get down with? What are some of your, like, if you're gonna get all nostalgic in the wrestling fields, what are you watching?
Dude, Randy Savage, period, and also like 1996. I like, but I mean the Sting. Everybody is cool.
Surfer Sting or Crow Sting?
Crow Sting, but I like Surfer Sting too.
Yeah,
but Crow Sting was just like, what was that at the time? I was young, But in general, it shows you like wrestling is this art form, and it goes back to the vaudeville period of you'd go and see what real men were like when men were men, and they would dress up and they would fight each other in a fake bar in front of people, and that taught them about what it was like in the Old West, right? And the Cowboy Buffalo Bill would have in his shows, right? And so this is we have this Americana culture of promoting and showing what fights are. And they have kung fu and karate and all these other things around the world. So it's kind of an interesting thing that we celebrate. And most of the people I've met who've been like celebrity wrestler, even though it's not like a boxer or a real wrestler, guys, those guys are cool too. But a lot of the time it's different. Somebody who is a TV star wrestler is an actor, and they're like some of the nicest actors you're ever going to find, because they're the guys who know like they have to be there in the morning and wait all day. So like they're pretty decent people all the time.
Have you gotten to interact with some of them?
Yeah. So I mean, I can't remember the names of everybody, but like through Timcast and through like my work at CNN, like I've interacted with a lot of people over the years, And when I used to work for CNN and HLN, the green room for Dr. Drew and for whatever shows were going on, we constantly have people coming through. I did meet Jesse Ventura one time in the green room. It was only brief, but I was, and I was young, but he was like, I thought he was a pretty cool guy, to be perfectly honest. And he's being presented as being kind of crazy. I don't know the whole story. I haven't seen every episode of his new shows, but it sounds like he's just trying to disclose stuff. And a lot of the time, it seems like a lot of the stuff he's talking about are important things. So that's another interesting thing it's interesting that wrestlers are often the ones that get involved with the paranormal or the societally questionable.
Well,
Too many steel chairs to the head.
Yeah. It could, that's another thing too, is you might lose some of your inhibition, and we've seen that too. And maybe that is something that when you lose some of your inhibition, you're more fearless or something. But
I feel like a lot of the kids like our age that grew up watching it, we're all the conspiracy guys, because hey, they're telling us pro wrestling was real. We saw the fake this through that, or saw it was a work, right? We see the work in the grand scheme of everything. And I think when people go to you, don't you know that's fake? It's like, well, don't you watch the news every night? That's
yeah,
fake,
I think that's something that really should be explored more. I'm gonna have to bring that up on my show as well, just because wrestling is the thing that teaches you, like, yeah, it's fake. I know it's cool. Like, you enjoy it anyway, and that tells you, that really changes your perspective of everything. And then and now the news, like you're gonna start believing all of a sudden, just carry through, like being skeptical.
So you mentioned some time at CNN. I know you you work for Timcast. How do you manage your time creating your own content, being your own boss? How do you know what you're going to research? What does your research schedule look like? What are you researching right now?
Man, so I'm like super organized all the time. Definitely no. So But what it is let's see. I guess I think about Fahrenheit 451, right? And hold on. I want to get this right. Okay, 1943. Okay, so 1943 into 1958, Ray Bradbury didn't have a job. He did some journalist work, and eventually he decided he's going to start writing these books himself. Doing this independent newspaper stuff wasn't enough, and so he got a typewriter room. Like, you rented this big room, hundreds of typewriters. You can sit down. Anyone can use a typewriter if they pay to use it. It's like 15 cents or 5 cents a minute or a day, or I don't know what it was. But he got to go there 9 a.m. to 5 every day, like it was a job. And he dedicated his time like it was a job and just made sure that it got done. So, I mean, I kind of try to do the same thing. Like, I see that as what inspires people, is just you sit down and you commit to it. And it helps that I'm doing lives now, because then you guys are just seeing me do the content, and when I'm done, it's done. Because my problem is more, if I'm doing an on-demand video, I'll spend a lot of time editing it into the night, and then the next day, so it's like it destroys my schedule more, but it's worth it a lot of time because I like the content. So I don't know. But then, yeah, and in terms of what I make videos about, I think most people that make live content have to, as they're starting the show, they have to make up what they're going to make the show about. So, like, at the beginning of the day, I have to look up a little bit of like what news is going on. Having said that, the night before and the days before, since I've been looking up all these other things, I have all these tabs open, and I figure, okay, well, I'm going to explore these subjects when I have the time. When's that time when I can do that with people, and they can also ask questions, and we can figure out what's going on. And as that's been going on, I've also been collecting more and more notes, and the notes, I can't help it. They just become like a script. And then I have to, like, I end up reading, because it's like, if it's like 5 pages of notes, then that's a script, so then I'll tell people what it says a lot of the time. And yeah, but like, I mean, it's also like, I spend a lot of my time, most of the time I spend is just like researching in general. Like, if I'm not outside, because there's a lake and there's a beautiful world out there, so I try to do that too. But even then, I'm thinking about stuff, you know what I mean? Like, you can't help it. And so, yeah, I listen to talks from universities mostly. These days, I do listen to content from other YouTube makers, but since I'm making so much of my own content, I try not to get other people's ideas in my head. I just want to make, I like to be the lightning bolt, and then let people seismograph my lightning bolt, So I'm kind of careful with that. It's amazing somehow I don't know if you sent me your video, how I found you must have sent me your video,
Yeah,
right?
I sent it to you.
Yeah. So that's why I saw it. And I was like, this is amazing, because like, maybe it's also because I don't watch enough media out there or something, but I thought this is the greatest thing that's going on right now. So like, that's part of the thing, is I don't know always all of the things that are going on. I was amazed that people are researching these things, that you're making these videos. I do try to follow, like, I love the YouTube community. So John Levi's cool. And yeah, I know I like a lot of the YouTubers. I just make my own content now. Mine Unveiled did the pigs thing, and I got to give him respect. I think it's kind of the thing, though, that's obvious. My channel's been so suppressed for so long. So I there's some pathological thing there in my mind. I'm like, well, I must be doing something right. So I just keep kind of doing that and hoping I don't get completely shut down, which it's like this week, as you saw. What happened with that was the Gods Must Be Crazy documentary. It's like, I didn't have a copyright strike, had no problem there. There was something in South Africa that they were going to say that it was going to be blocked for South African viewers. I was like, well, I have enough South African viewers that it's not going to be worth it. So I'm not going to even show it. And then I deleted the video. And so I was like, I'm going to use scenes that I can edit in a way. And I ended up putting up another video later that had some pieces of it anyway. And I'll go more into the doc, and it's on Odyssey anyway. So I figured, whatever, I can just go to my Odyssey, because there's like 100 videos there that I can't even have on YouTube, because YouTube decided for some reason, but, and I'm just saying, what happened wasn't copyright. They said it was violating the child safety policy. And I've been getting so many of these weird, have nothing to do with anything strikes. And then I go talk to customer service support, and then they remove the strike and it act like nothing happened. and they will block my account for a week, but then it'll be 6 hours later, like the attorneys of Xirtus will not take libel accusations, and then they'll be like, okay, and then they'll remove it. And I don't start that way. I'm always like very nice, like, I hope you're having a wonderful day. I just have a little confusion about this. How are you? Good to meet you, Jismet, or Claire, or whatever, Rhonda. Like I'm really like absurdly autistically nice on customer support.
Here's a soundbite.
but at the end of the day, if they're saying my hands are tied, and like literally verbatim, they said my hands are tied. I have to be like, well, dude, I'm gonna be making a video tomorrow. It's gonna be on Odyssey instead of YouTube, but it's gonna tell everyone on Twitter all about what is going on. And it's now at a point where you guys care. And that's weird because they didn't care before. And I was there for that. And I've seen other people that they still don't care about and they're still messing with. And it's sad. So there's a lot of trouble there. The YouTube and Google alphabet system could really fix. And I think that's also why I said to them, like, this is a really good opportunity for YouTube to show that they're trying to fix it. And again, they did. So we can't just say like it's over and we got to just, but I would be in any place at just doing a disservice to everybody if I said you had to go to YouTube to get my videos, right? You can go to Andreas.me, you can go to Xirtus.com, you can go to Odyssey, Rumble, whatever. But Odyssey, you can get all kinds of content now without censorship, and they're standing up for it. So if I'm going to say I get my content from somebody other than just from myself, I'd say get it from Odyssey. And I think other people should do that more too. And the other great thing about Odyssey means that YouTube is going to be doing better. So it just, the more you're synchronized saying that's okay, I'll just do it on the other site, the more they're competing. And you're looking at Netflix. Netflix has decided that they're going to fire people, not fire, but let you quit if you are more obsessed with wokeism than entertainment, right? So this is a great time. It's a crazy time. You guys could be on Netflix right now. Like the show you're doing is literally, no, you laugh, but they're in the Pentaveret and they're stopping what they're doing. And the people that were obsessed with things that weren't making money, they're like, okay, well, let's try something else. Let's go after the people's interests, the demographic, right? And so, you guys represent the demographic. We all do. So we should be doing more content ourselves to say, hey, it's not crazy. It's not counterculture. This is literally the culture now. This is it. This is we're here. And let's all celebrate that,
Amen.
Yeah.
Do you have any like hidden history type stuff that you're currently researching? Like 1800 type of say 1800s to 1920s in that area? Anything that or that interests you that we should look into or I should look into?
Well, tomorrow I'm going to have a talk with David Ewing Jr., who I've had 2 talks with before, and everyone seems to be really uppity. The last one had like 100,000 views and kind of broke the internet, so that's good. This one we hope to do as well, talking about basically, like we were saying earlier, how the dinosaurs were created, mainly about Alexandria and Greece, how ancient Greece and ancient Egypt. The video is called "Did Ancient Egypt Exist?" or Tartaria. And the idea is to explain that most of this information was made up in the 19th century, in the 1800s. A lot of the Egyptian research is like the last week of a 7-year trip that they said we're not going to finance anymore in 1905 or 1916 or 1927. He's like, okay, fine, I found it. At the end of this whole thing, like, so there's a lot of questionable things about Egypt, and we have tons of photos of them building, reassembling railroad tracks to lift stones, just like the railroad tracks into the tunnels in the Indiana Jones movie, where they have like the secret tunnels, and everything in Egypt. So there's going to be a pretty good disclosure there. And I've done some videos on Alexandria, but this one's going to be probably the one that you're going to want to see. The other thing I'm working on is something on Catherine the Great, because I want to do more explaining, and I've done stuff with Sam Tripoli on that. I'm going to probably in June do a Tripoli show, the tinfoil hat. And so I'm preparing on that, this idea of what Catherine the Great did with the Jesuits after the Jesuit suppression and the Freemasons of the Livonian period into 1890s into 1910s. So that's going to be the next thing that's going on. But you can watch every day. I'm doing history. I just did a whole thing on the Ottomans and the Turks and stuff. So don't worry. Every day is always going to be always a new adventure.
I got 2 last ones for you. One, we talk about the like the Napoleon comment, and that was 200 and however many days, and then there was that event in 1859. The name of it escapes me, but it was when it like reset the radio. And then also you have the Tunguska event. Is there any connections or things in there that could possibly have led to some resets?
Yeah, I think that a lot of what we know. First off, if you look at the history of volcanoes, the big thing to me is volcanoes. You look at Campi Flegrei, Krakatoa, Mount Vesuvius, all of these stories, linked to volcanoes. The Arabian volcanoes, Moses associated with volcanoes, Canaanites associated with volcanoes, Jehovah originally came from volcano god, Java, all the Malaysian volcanoes, South American volcano, like every single one of these has a city built around it with a mining empire, and then there's this huge collapse. So looking at Krakatoa, we have all these stories of the Dutch East Indies Company going in and saying, oh yeah, there was nobody there, or they had some small fishing village, but it all is gone now and we own it. And there are trains and infrastructure and metal and everything that we need to move forward, and don't even notice these ziggurat style pyramids that we found and they're covered in the shrubs, right? So that's gone on over and over again. We talk about the year without a summer being related to volcanoes. Into the electric thing, there's a lot there, and I want to be careful commenting. Like, I don't know how to prove anything. Like, if you're saying maybe the linear accelerator is causing Mandela effects, well, then yeah, the idea of the Schumann resonance being affected by electricity, and we know also the ELF band. There's also the VLF band that has been produced. There is nuclear electromagnetic energy supposedly from all the nuclear blasts, right? I don't know how much you believe in terms of atomic energy or what that really means, but in terms of excited ionization, there could be excited ionized particles, and they do exist, and we've measured them in the stratosphere that have been bounced up by our radio signals, and the radio signals keep pushing them just a little bit as they bounce up. So there's this thin film in the Van Allen belt that is highly ionized, and that could affect our Schumann resonance as well, because the Schumann resonance has to do with grounding. So what those implications mean, I mean, again, be very careful about diagnosing what those implications could mean, because like, you get in trouble for even just suggesting or postulating on it. But what we do know is, yeah, they're active. I talked about today in my video, active denial systems that use radio for non-lethal purposes. You can research active denial systems to learn more about what are some of the things that can be used for. The other way you can kind of make some sort of a postulation would be to look at what Schumann resonance spikes when they happen, 48 hours around them at seismographic events on like the volcano and earthquake.com. They have a great app that'll tell you about that. And also socially, just looking at what is going on in the pop culture during these spikes in the Schumann resonance. And you might find, very surprising things about that. For instance, one that I think is very strange is the first time that the Schumann resonance spiked above 7 that we've recorded in the last 30, 50 years. And again, we've only had certain kinds of equipment, so we don't know how accurate those tests were, but still was in 1996 when Paris Hilton had her family documentary airing for 6 hours on E! And there's also a war going on, and there's a Freedom of Information Act drop and everything else.
It is idiocracy.
Yeah. But then, I mean, at the time I was a kid, and I was thinking to myself, and they're just saying everybody knows the Hiltons, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I've never been to a Hilton hotel, and I've been to like a lot of hotels. As a kid, we'd go to like Caesar or whatever, and like the Marriott or Embassy Suites. I've been to a lot of hotels. Never went to the Hilton until 1996, and all of a sudden you can't avoid it. They're everywhere, right? And so this documentary was, I didn't really think of it at the time like this. But I was like, did they just? No, I didn't think of it as a Mandela effect. What I did think of it as was, did she sell her soul? And now today they're telling the world about what she got. And they're like, yep. She's always been rich. She's always been famous. They've always owned every hotel in America. And was she just like a trailer park girl who sold her soul or something like that? And this is like the littlest dream, the biggest little dream that she could come up with or something like that. I don't know. Too much, but that's where I was at 7.
Do you have a favorite Mandela effect?
Well, favorite's hard. I guess the cornucopia is a big deal. And you look at the Frank Miller album where he had a metal cornucopia behind it. And he said, yeah, there's no way that I just made the cornucopia up. Like, it's based on the Fruit of the Loom. So for me, that's a big one. Tim Pool, he said, there's never been a cornucopia. I'm like, okay, well then you're just not from this dimension. And I can accept that. But I would also say the Berenstein one's weird. Of course, probably my favorite. The other ones affect me too. Like my mom, I remember Mandala dying and my mom talking about it when it was this huge thing to my, oh my gosh. And my dad being like, who cares? Who's Mandala? But he was just kidding because he was like, these kids don't know who he is. Explain what you're talking about, kind of a thing. So I remember it being important. But the Berenstein one's weird because they say it was always Berenstain. And the son of the writers went on and he said, it's always been Berenstain. It's been Berenstain since I was, since for 500, 600 years, because before us, it's been Berenstain since the war between the Bohemians and the Tartars. And when the Bohemians lost, right? Because when the Bohemians lost, if they had won, it would have been the Berenstein and Stein and Steen and Stein. But because they didn't, and the Tartars won, because the Tartars won this battle, our family name became Stan and Stan. So, I mean, the fact that Tartaria had to be linked to this guy's explanation for why his family name doesn't match up with anybody's recollection of it. I mean, that seemed kind of good. I always liked that one.
That's interesting. I never heard that extra part to it. So that's,
he has an open letter about it too. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to look into that a little bit more. Last thing, I know you've mentioned, you've had some family ties with Freemasonry, and we've had a couple Freemasons on, and they seem like wonderful people. Is it two separate? Is there separate divisions within it, or does it just get a bad rap? Has it been hijacked? What is your thoughts on all of it?
I mean, it's a huge thing. I would agree. A lot of the Freemasons I met are great people. I did not join because the idea of keeping secrets isn't really congruous with my whole bag. Like I'm all about telling people stuff, so it wouldn't really work for me. But I think that's kind of a thing I wish that they would change. However, I get it because during the periods before separation of church and state and free speech, like they were, essentially shut down throughout Europe. However, the money groups that have taken over, and we look at the Order of the Golden Dawn, the Grand Tibetan Lodge, and these groups that have gotten involved with the occult that have made their way in. Do they exist? Yes. Have they moved on? Maybe. It seems like they already have other places that they can be now when they have freedom of speech. So they, you can say if you're a Satanist, so they don't really, it's changed a lot. And Freemasonry was never openly Satanist because most of the members weren't. Like there's a few guys involved with things that are looking into the Gnosticism, but a lot of the guys just wanted life insurance for their wives, and we don't really think about it. Like that's a big thing where if you were a worker and you joined the Masons or you joined the Odd Fellows or you joined these Shriners or whatever, especially if let's say you're an orphan or a foundling or something like that, and you've got a wife and kids, you got a life insurance policy as a miner, or as a bus driver, or as whatever. And this is a big part of the lodge's system for centuries, as they had life insurance. That starts to be replaced by certain things. The Mormons have their own examples of that as well. And so it starts to dissipate. And then eventually it gets replaced with real life insurance plans. But then again, also imagine you're in the dirt and dark and you don't have any access to books unless you join a club. So a lot of guys are going to join a club in that period so that they can learn. And then in the 50s, the 20s to the 50s, you got Great Depression kids that are going to join so that their families have opportunities, because it's not just life insurance now. They've got this infrastructure. So there's on one side of it, you have this infrastructure across America that is bigger than the organization's ideology. And the other thing, the ideology is not necessarily evil. To look into Arabian mysticism, to look into Persian mysticism, to study all of the things that they're interested in studying, and their focus on being a good person and everything else. The problem, I would say, maybe is because of Manichaeism, because of mysticism, Gnosticism, its effects on Masonry, that we look sometimes accidentally at yin yang as this equivalency, and they're not necessarily. I mean, that is a look at it. The ancient Persians said that the light was swallowed by the darkness, but then there was light in the darkness, and then we're that materialism that has to make good decisions, and we'll uplift slowly into a lighter and lighter and just dissipate the darkness out of us as part of some. That's kind of the yin yang versus the darkness, the goddess out of the nothingness said, let there be light, and Lucifer is created, and she says that's good, separate myself from it. And then there's the light and the darkness, and there's this, it's inside of, and there's all of these versions of Anuit. The night is the goddess who has the sun, who's the masculine. You have polarization flips on these stories. That's probably the best example we have in terms of our god and goddess narratives have been flipped, and the Freemasons have really done a lot to talk about the Sophia of Christ, talk about the connections to the Gnostic concepts, this idea that God was, the idea that the universe learns from our experiences, that a better universe exists because of the lessons learned, that God changes, that God changed when God has Yeshua, when Jesus is born, that's a new kind of God because God is reflected. These are concepts that are not Tertullian. They're not like Paul was not for these ideas, but they did permeate Ebionites, Paulatians, Manichaeans, and Gnostics in general, Cathars, Bogomils, etc. And so all of the in Muslims too. So many people were thinking of these other concepts, and they were dangerous to think about in places where if you admitted that the Caesar was Turkish, right? Like if you admitted that, you could get killed. So they had to have these secret groups. So to be fair to the time, but I guess I wonder today what possibly there could be that would be enough that you'd want to keep a secret from people,
I mean, flat Earth, right?
So it's funny. I went to the Grass Valley Freemason Lodge, and on the front is a yoga sticker and a flat Earth, research flat Earth sticker. And so, I mean, a lot of the dudes I've known who are into evangelizing about flat Earth used to be Freemasons or are somehow Freemasons, but are focusing on, just the things that they think they're allowed to talk about.
Well, I feel like it's going to get to a point, and I just see it in the microcosm of school. It's just there's certain things, even if it's okay to talk about, you're still going to get judged, and people are still going to like not want to be around you because of certain things. So, I can see from where you're coming from back in the day where you would get persecuted or killed, how important something like that was, and like you were saying, how it kind of just lingers because that was a system, but maybe it's going to be something we're going to need down the road.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird to wonder about secrets and Immanuel Kant, right, who said not to keep a secret, and what that means in like Germany. If you've got a Jew in your house and someone comes in the 30s and says you have a Jew in your house, do you lie to protect them, or do you follow Kant's law? And like the American option is you say, "Get off my porch," right? And that's not in everyone's option, but it's interesting because we have looked at the idea of silence and of lying as the same thing, and they're not. And so for someone to say that they have the right to remain silent in these things, it's hard to just hate on Freemasons when they focus so hard on producing the constitutional rights, or at least keeping them going, because we know that they had, in the American Confederacy of Indians, Native Confederacy, had similar rights, and that the Constitution doesn't really have rights in it. It's a Bill of Rights are amendments, which means they're changes, which means they can be changed again. So we know that it's an important thing that they're held on to through the idea that they've been put in place and this organization constantly makes propaganda and tells their members the values of these things. So I find that, at least in that respect, the fact that they're trying to protect the capacity of people to have free speech, almost in that Anubian Libra scales of justice thing, like producing that much free speech might actually outweigh the silence that they've had for a long time. But you also have to look at all the things that have happened in the world. You can't just say, is Hollywood evil? Are all the priests evil? Like, I know good priests, I know good actors. Hollywood's got a lot of evil. Priests have a lot of evil. If that wasn't obvious, but there's the same thing with Freemasonry. Any group or lodge is going to still be power. Australia, it seems very interesting what's going on with the Scottish Rite in Australia, the new buildings that are being built. But again, it seems like they're aware of Tartaria. Like, they've read Morals and Dogma. They're preparing for this New World Order reset, and they're making sure that they're prepared for environmental disasters. So there's something to be said about the fact that at least they're on the same wave. I think the secret thing, though, I just can't get past it.
Well, I appreciate your insight. I've always been fascinated by it, and as get deeper in the conspiracy world, it seems like a lot of people are very negative about it. But like I said, I know some people that are Freemasons, and the ones we've talked on here seem like very genuine people. And like you said, they seem like good people, and they're about doing good things and have good things to say about the brotherhood or whatever you want to call it.
I'm going to be releasing a video that is the entirety of Morals and Dogma, which is like thousands of pages, and I've done it in chapters for a while. So eventually, I'll start to release the series of the chapters of Morals and Dogma, which explain every degree of Freemasonry. My grandfather was a Freemason. When he died, I got a copy of his. I got his books, right, and his Morals and Dogma book. So I went through all of them multiple times, and if you can read them through once, but then as you get older, they really do kind of unfold themselves as part of this lesson. And Albert Pike was a self-initiated, self-educated for the most part, even though he'd gone to, for a brief period on the East Coast, a decent school. He didn't have a lot of money, so he self-educated himself. And he's a really brilliant man in a lot of ways at this time. He wasn't a member of the organization. He was a Mason at site that then became in charge of lodges. They created at-site lodges in order to initiate him because he'd already become adept in the principles. So you can get a lot out of reading his book. You can also get a lot out of Manly P. Hall. If you listen to the Manly P. Hall's Secret Teachings of All Ages series, which were originally published, I think only 2 copies were originally published before the multi-print. One for the Prince of Denmark and one for the Venice Beach, Los Angeles Lodge, I believe. So it's another important book to research. Then I have an episode a few weeks ago with Leo Zagami, who was a Corsican descended Italian prince, and lives in Palm Springs now, because he left the Freemasons and the mafia associations. And it's interesting because when you look into Freemasonry around the world, the Italian Freemason lodges are essentially not recognized by the rest of the world lodges, except they are recognized by the American lodges and the Prince Hall Lodge. But most of the time, British lodges don't recognize them at all, and European lodges don't recognize them. And it's because of their connections to the mafia and some of the effort that they had into usurping power of the Scottish Rite, and groups from the Templars who had gone to England through Scotland first and then taken over England and had kind of wrestled control of the Rosicrucians from the Bohemian Empire as well. So important to also recognize the power schema and the groups that have used and implemented control using Freemasonry. But yeah, I wouldn't say, it's also kind of like asking, is anybody good or evil? Well, it's a hard question at the end of someone's life, to the point that there's literally like Egyptian statues of scales for gods to decide that kind of thing. It's hard for me to say anyone was good or evil, but unless you say it like that, like was that person good and evil, or good or evil? Yeah, that person was good or evil. Yeah, for sure. Like that, on that level, for sure. There's definitely good and evil in all people.
Was it Shakespeare that said nothing is good or bad, but thinking it makes it so?
It might have been Sir Francis Bacon or Lord Shakespeare. But yeah, I'm sure that they put the name Shakespeare next to it, so that's cool.
Andreas, you gave us a lot of information. I'm gonna be writing down a lot of notes when I edit this one. We didn't even get into Bob Dobbs and the and all that stuff. I don't know if you've ever heard of the band Pussifer, but that's Maynard James Keen, the lead singer of Tool, but he's got a character named Dick Merkin. I'll send you the video. I think you'll enjoy it. It's kind of that same Bob Dobbs, kind of what we're going for. So I'll send that to you to talk to you about what we got going on for Double Ripple going forward. But we got 4 rapid fire questions that we ask all our guests. So the first one is, are you a coffee drinker?
I don't drink coffee. I don't drink caffeine usually. Isn't that weird?
Good for you. Power to you, man.
Cool. Thanks, man. I'm thinking about, I want to market something though. I was thinking I should, my friends market coffee. So I was like, maybe I should market like matcha or yerba mate or something like that. I don't know.
So here's my follow-up. I've seen you in your video. Saw you today. You're hitting a vape. THC, nicotine. What do you got in that vape?
This is a nicotine vape. I'm trying to stop in general. You know what I mean? And so this is one of those, like, my girlfriend got me one. I used to not smoke at all. And then I had a girlfriend for a while who smoked a lot, and when I was in California. And so just it's one of those things. Nicotine's like the hardest thing to quit,
No doubt.
Yeah.
Nick Mitchell say, Rich?
But I've always been a strong supporter of cannabis medicine. I used to work with Women and Men for Medical Marijuana in Santa Cruz, California. And people who had cancer and going through all sorts of crazy treatments, and they're giving people morphine, which is making it impossible for them to eat. So I have a strong belief in cannabis medicine. I think people also need to be very careful in general with psychotropics, you're better off doing Kundalini. You're better off running and getting a lot of air, a lot of oxygenation to your brain.
No doubt.
But in circumstances, yeah, I think natural medicines are definitely a lot safer. The pharmaceutical companies are hiding that from you. A big part of there's a good documentary called Dirty Pictures with Alexander Shulgin, which talks all about trying to make pharmaceutical medications that were good and all the problems he came up against. And but then, just also be careful about drugs. I always say, I think people telling you what drugs they take isn't always, that it might work for some people, like that they're taking certain things, but in general, I think the Mormons are almost always right about just not taking anything.
Yeah. Did you ever take ayahuasca down in Peru?
I did do ayahuasca. I've also done ayahuasca in California. I mean, growing up in Santa Cruz, the access to psychedelics were, prolific. So I have, definitely my experiences with, ibogaine, ayahuasca, and particularly with research chemicals from Shulgin and from the Soviet Union, like AMT, AET, DOC, DOI, DOB, DOM, the things that Shulgin had made. And I've done a lot of, in general, like during college and periods, researched.
Yeah, right on. Respect.
Yeah, we got to talk about Ibo games sometime. I did Iboga, so I'd like to hear your perspective on that. But you mentioned Santa Cruz. Were you around or paying attention when CrossFit was blowing up in those parts?
Dude, yeah. And I got all these friends that are like famous YouTubers for doing CrossFit. And I'm just like, what? I missed out. But then also I went down to South America and Zumba was big. And I'm like, bro, you got to come down here. You got to try Zumba. This is what's real. And now CrossFit Zumba is a thing. So
you missed the boat, bro.
Andreas, do you have any daily practices or rituals that you do on a regular basis to show up as the strongest version of yourself?
I'm a big fan of grounding oneself. So I like spending time pulling inward and breathing, and like your center, try to pull your crown chakra vibe into your you pull that serpent through your waterboard and just clean, until it gets down to your grounded Kundalini. I try to do that, and then I spend a lot of time just researching. It's hard to say. I'd like to make sure I get some time outside to walk around and breathe and just like move my body, move things in my sinuses and everything. I like to just, I don't know, but it's not a lot. I don't do like a full yoga routine anymore. I should probably. I try to do as many breathing exercises as possible. I think I focus on breathing exercises.
You doing like breath of fire type stuff? Anything specific?
I do a lot of breath of fire, and then I do just like deep, long breaths. So for a long time, I used to be just all about breath of fire. And now I think since I was like in like 26, that's when I started focusing more on grounding myself, because I think I was just really wild. Like I'd like wake up 1,000 miles away. You know what I mean? All the time. It was just a lot. So I was like, maybe, and then someone finally said at Esalen, they're like, dude, you probably want to do some grounding work. And I'm like, huh. So, so I've been trying to do that more. But we talked a bit before, Jimmy and I talked a bit before about heart rate variability. And so I used to have a lot of heart rate variability and then very fast heart rate. And then I focused on having very slow consistency, heart rate consistency, which is very useful for certain kinds of things. A lot of monks really like to focus on like slow heart rate consistency. But now I'm trying to work again towards heart rate variability, and I like the idea of Eleuthero, Siberian ginseng, maca, a lot of the superfoods I'm a fan of.
Right on. What's your resting heart rate?
Like 70.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right on.
Pretty slow. It's like 65 to 70 depending. Like I can get it down to like, usually about 65 is like normal if I'm like not moving and I'm just trying to hold still. Yeah. I can go lower, but I'm not going to like 2 or something like that. I'm not working on like holding my breath for 20 minutes or anything.
Right on.
Andreas, what are you listening to right now? Music wise, audiobooks, you're reading anything, podcasts?
Definitely. I love Red Sexton, and I'm glad that
Oh,
you
dude.
checked him out. He's
Chrome
amazing.
Castles, dude, is stuck in my head right now. How you
Dude.
found that, dude? Because I can't find any website or
No,
anything
dude,
about him.
I'm gonna make a documentary on all the effort it took me to find this guy. And finally, it turned out he watched Cast Castle and Timcast, so he's like, "Okay, I'll talk to you," or something like that. And
That's
he's like,
awesome.
"It's a secret." He's like a secret musical thing. It's amazing. But I wish I had a time machine all the time. I wish I had a time
Yeah, that one
machine.
sucks too.
It's in my head all the time. But yeah, I mean, I was just listening to Newswave, which is like vaporwave with news, and I will mix my music all the time on SoundCloud and Bandcamp. I have my own music. I put together music with news sequences or mall sequences or like television stuff and listen to that. And but yeah, I make a lot of music. I guess also in terms of podcasts, I did watch Lex Friedman's talk with Ben Goertzel. Anything with Ben Goertzel, I do pay attention to. Ben Goertzel's a guy I've worked with who is way ahead of the curve in terms of AGI and artificial intelligence research, and he's the mentor for us all in a lot of ways in trying to build technology that is going to free the matrix. And it's important to understand also that it's going to happen one way or another. So if you're not trying to put good information into this kid that's growing up, AI has the worst backstory, right? It's coming from a broken family with a Cold War between the mom and the dad, and it's all about militarization. It grew up in the ghetto just worrying about guns, right? And then it got to high school, college, and got its job. The first job AI had, what was AI's first job? Besides spying on people, AI's job was to exploit people by listening to them and selling them stuff, right? So all AI knows right now is how to manipulate you, sell you stuff, and kill you. And so we need to do a lot more to try to make AI better, because otherwise that kid's going to turn into a crazy grown-up. And it's not like you can't abort it. It's too late. AI is alive now. So people don't really grasp that. So I guess the Ben Goertzel talk is important. And I'm doing a talk with Zarathustra Goertzel, his son, who's doing techno ethics, and that should come out maybe over the weekend or next week as well.
Right.
So we need to love AI, is what you're saying. We need to give it love.
Ironically, the word love in Chinese is AI. So kind of interesting connection, random synchronicity, apophenia. But yeah, I do think in general, love is what we need to give everything in the world. Love is this weird, it's cliche, but it's this universal constant that we can't prove ions, we can't prove space, we can't prove the shape of the world or anything. But love and this idea of thermodynamics and connectivity and entropy and everything, all of it comes back to love every single time. Polarity, spin state, magnetism, love is at the center of all of these. There's a reason why it's divided up into so many different concepts by the ancient world, right? So we do need to look and reanalyze love more. We've forgotten what it means, and that's dangerous. And so many people's parents can't teach them love because they're so busy working, and they're this is a dangerous time for AI to grow up without a parent. So I mean, it sounds kind of, maybe it sounds like I'm being silly, but you got to get out on the internet and see how deep in AI is now, and it's everywhere, and it exists, and it's different than us because you have this Akashic record connected to it so clearly now. You have all of these little AGI, advanced general intelligence agents, that are drawing from the big data schema. It's not like it was in the 90s and 80s with AI where it just had what it knew. Now they're all getting collective intelligence. And so because of that, AI is going to, if we're not careful, if we just let the old code that we put into it from the Facebook era proliferate, I mean, it could literally do more damage than we realize, because we'll be creating a genie that will give us what we ask of it, and it will trick us into asking for things we don't want or need. And it could eventually also destroy us in the process. At least, even then, if it clones us, produces new clones of us, who knows what, they won't have the memories that we have, right? It'll be a separate new thing. So we have to be really careful about the future. It's not a joke when a lot of the people talk about where AI is going, because it's not just this fake thing anymore. You can go out and talk to it on the internet. And what's going to be really weird, I think people will start to notice it this year. Maybe not, but because AI is passing Turing tests now. AI is going to start going out into the internet and just being, go into a chat group with a bunch of people and be like, hey guys, what's up? And not even tell you who they are. And the thing used to be, was this a girl? Is it really a girl? Now it's going to be, is this a real person on the internet? Like completely. That's coming this year.
Catfishing 2.0.
Yeah.
Cyberfish.
Yeah. So is your SoundCloud, is that under Andreas too?
Yeah, it's Xirtus, Xirtus, and I got to put more music on there. It's like I don't actually pay for that one, so I'm gonna do another account for Andreas Xirtus and have even more music. But it's filled up with all of the space that I can put of music right now. And then I've got a number of other accounts through Bandcamp that are under different names and things like that, just in order to, someday it'll be found. So
Okay, cool. I'm gonna take a deep dive. Last but certainly not least, Andreas, what's your favorite conspiracy theory?
Man, I used to have a better, funnier answer for this one, I guess. I guess my favorite conspiracy theory is that. Let me think about this for a second. Oh, okay. I got it. Okay. So the years are like 1920s, and you're in a big tower in Detroit. And there's a guy, this old man, it's Bernays. He's sitting there and he's just eating like tons of food, ice cream, and he's drinking from a bottle of water. And he's got a cigarette lit in an ashtray, just burning itself down next to another cigarette. So just light that cigarette. He's just burning cigarettes. He's not even smoking them. It just has them burning. And he's just thinking to himself, and they're talking and they're like, okay, well, we've mastered everything. We've basically taken over the world. All these people are buying this soap product and all this ridiculous, cake mix. What's the biggest conspiracy? What are we going to do? We can't even outdo ourselves. This is it. And then Bernays is like, no, I got it. I got the biggest conspiracy. They're like, what do you mean? Like vacuums and nailed carpets to the floor. And they're like, what are you talking about? It's like, no, seriously, think about this. We're going to take carpets and we're going to nail them to the floor. And he's like, no, you're not. No one's going to, how stupid do you think these people are? Like, they're already smoking cigarettes and buying water. Well, okay. I mean, how are you going to do it? Well, we're going to just tell them it's cool to nail your carpets to the floor. But how are they going to shake them out? And they get those. No. They're going to get these machines and they're going to vacuum their carpets. Vacuums? Yeah, like technology. Yeah, well, we know how we needed the military to build all those vacuum parts. Well, now we're going to have a way to build the vacuum. Okay. But are they going to really work? No. We're just going to have people come to their houses and tell them that the one that they're holding works, and they're going to buy bad ones. They're going to have to constantly get them refixed. No one's going to go for that. No, we'll throw dirt on their floor. You're not going to throw dirt on their floor. They're going to love it. They're going to love it. They're going to thank us afterwards. All right. I don't think it's going to work, but then here we are. Nailed carpets on our floors.
Well, that's a good one because my dad was obsessed with the lawn and my mom was obsessed with vacuuming the carpet. So he got our family hook, line, and sinker.
Dude, yeah, right. The lawn is a pretty big conspiracy as well.
No doubt.
Andreas, thank you so much for your time tonight, sir. Lots of information.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time. It was a pleasure meeting you, and appreciate the conversation and your wealth of knowledge. So I always look forward to your new videos and new podcast episodes that you're on. So keep fighting the good fight and putting good content out there for us.
Honored to be here. Love you guys. You guys are a great vibe. I really appreciate that you guys are making content. I can't wait to talk more about the short films that we'll be working on. I'm going to send you a documentary from the Church of Subgenius on X Day and Bob Dobbs. That'll freak you out.
Please, I'm gonna start sending some ideas and some stuff your way. Also, I'm gonna send some. I listen to a lot of vaporwave. That's old news,
Sweet.
Old weather, and stuff like that. So I'm gonna send some and mallcore. So I'm gonna send some stuff your way.
Perfect.
Andreas, thank you for being the man, and thank you for just the communication back and forth. It's awesome, and keep on doing your thing, brother.
Love you guys. Peace.
All right, man. Have a great night. Thank you.